only mode.
Well, good afternoon to everybody. Today we're going to be talking about behavioral risk threat assessment. How do you stop bullying, suicide, and guns before it's too late? This is the second in the series for 2017 with RenWeb, and we're glad that you joined us today to hear more about it. I'm Jim Satterfield, and I'll share you some more details as we go along. We'd like you to join us on Twitter at Firestorm Soul and become our friend at Firestorm Solutions on Facebook. There is a hashtag for today's session, and that hashtag is #CrisisCoach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value, and it empowers you and your school to manage risk and crises. Our expertise is in crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Firestorm is America's crisis coach, and really what we're trying to help you do is to manage that interaction between risk and crisis. Now, as in most of our presentations, our attorneys always like to have the last word. It's amazing how attorneys do that. And this presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussions. That was a tongue twister this afternoon. And any work product that we provide must be in conjunction with guidance from your local authorities as well as your own personal counsel. And finally, this shouldn't be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion today. So this is the second in the 2017 series underwritten by RenWeb and Facts. We are excited to bring you this information. You can go to firestorm.com and watch previous webinars. You can register for future ones. You can download the white papers or briefs associated with them. This is an online training center that you have access to as a result of your being a RenWeb client. And so we're excited about the partnership that we've had with them over the last 4 years. I would tell you it's not too early to start planning for the user group meeting this coming summer in July. It's a phenomenal opportunity to network and to get answers. There'll be individual training sessions there for you to participate in. Scott couldn't be with us on the call today. He's doing too many different things at one time, which is normal for Scott. But if you've got questions, feel free to reach out to RenWeb. Their software will help you run your school significantly more effectively. As we think about it, my name today is Jim Satterfield. I'm the President and CEO of Firestorm, and I'm glad to be with you and to have this conversation today. Now, as we think about this word that appears, crisis, I'd like you to stop for a moment and think about what comes to mind. What do you think about? Is it a tornado? Is it a flood? Is it a terrorist event? What would come to mind? I know when we talk with parents, active shooter is a significant concern. They're concerned about having their child returned safely to them. And we're going to talk about that some today. And when we think about a crisis, it's a turning point in an organization. And it really defines who you are and who your school is. If I were to ask you today and say what comes to mind when I say the word Columbine, you would immediately not say the state flower for Colorado. You would be talking about the school and the shooting that was there. So we want to focus on those types of events. And we're going to take a different approach today. We're not going to focus on what do you do with the active shooter and they're standing there with the gun. What we're going to do today is focus on how do we identify behaviors of concern and intercede before it escalates to violence, because it's much better for everyone involved to be able to deal with it at that point instead of waiting. So you'll hear today a discussion around behavioral risk threat assessment and how that becomes the workplace violence plan for you and your school, and you have a big benefit here. If you're a RenWeb school, you can have a one-year license into the Firestorm Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment Program at no cost. And that fits most school budgets. But let's move forward. There was a survey question before the webinar today, and it says, do you believe your organization is equipped to identify a threat before it becomes a crisis? 35% of you said, yep, we think we are. 14% said nope, and 51% said, well, we're unsure, which is the same thing as no, because if you had this system in place, it would let you know. This exposure factor here is exactly where we want to put the emphasis today, and hopefully some of you who answer yes will see some things that you want to add that will make a difference in your school and the safety of your students. But let's go back. Let's look at your school. One of these dots represents your school. Maybe you can figure out which one. But at this point, they're all kind of the same. But if something happens, if there was an active shooter, if there was an act of violence, that school stands out in this area. Now, what we do with planning and putting things in place is to try to keep you blended in with everyone else, that you're not standing out at that particular point in time. Because when the act of violence comes, it's easy to spot that school, and if we don't have the right processes in place, it's going to dominate the landscape, and it will be all anyone ever thinks about associated with it. Clearly having an emergency response plan is needed. Clearly having security elements there. But if we can stop it before that violent act occurs, before it expands and takes over control of your brand, your image, and your reputation, or worse, before it costs the life of a student or a teacher, no one wants to be in a position of having to make that call to a family and saying, your child is not coming home from school today. So as we think about all these things, the question then comes, where do you start? All of these various elements are there, and recognize that a crisis isn't business as usual, it's business as unusual, and almost everything you learn initially in a crisis is wrong. So how do we put a program in place that's going to make a difference within our school? Well, we've looked at the lessons that we've learned, and as you've known from the webinar series that we've done over the last several years, Firestorm did the crisis management at Virginia Tech. After the shootings there, it'll be 10 years this April. We look at all the other emergencies that we're called into, the activities that are going on. We can share with you those insights, and this program that we're going to talk about is built upon that foundation. But we're going to start today, and we're going to focus on threats, and we're going to focus on behaviors of concern. Because if we can identify the threat, if we can identify the behavior of concern before it escalates to violence, then that makes a significant difference. So let's start to look under the covers. And we're going to do this several times during the webinar today and present those behaviors of concern in different formats to help you structure your strategy and ideas. So threatening behavior is very clear. The bullying, the fights, threats, if I don't get this, I'll do that, or I'm going to shoot that person, or I'm going to make them pay, or a weapon at school. I think we do a great job across all of our schools once it rises to this level. But sometimes the behaviors of concern aren't quite so clear. It's earlier in the process. There's somebody that's a loner, or someone else that maybe have some strange behavior, or maybe they have some attendance problems. There's been a change associated with them that becomes that indicator. In many of these cases, we find that schools miss that particular starting of the path to violence. And if you intervene early, we can control it at that area. Now, in the right-hand column, there's a word in red, and that's change. And that's one of the key areas, that delta. Somebody that was always had good attendance and has bad. Someone that was doing well in school and they do bad. Someone that makes that change, well, it makes a difference at that point. That's one of the key indicators, is that change area. And as we talk about all of these things, we want you to focus on behavior as opposed to focusing on demographics. What we're talking about today is behavior and how we look at it. We're going to look at it 3 times in 3 different ways to help frame that, and then give you the outline of a program to be able to manage it. Now, we'll remind you that there are protective factors. There are things that will reduce risk, and you see them listed in the blue quadrant there at the bottom of the slide. But let's go a little bit further. What leads to violence? Breakdown of support systems, personal factors, factors in the school or the workplace that can do that. You see them listed here. And so we've got to think about, if there's a support system that's not there, the child is at greater risk. And when we talked about children, this could be a teacher, it could be any other member of your organization. There are the personal factors that start to come into play, and then factors within the workplace or the school grounds. So as we delve into this, who poses a threat? Who's at the highest risk? The more of these items that you see in an individual, the greater the likelihood that you're going to have someone that's on a path to violence that you're going to need to interact with sooner relative to later. Now, we work with insurance companies on a regular basis, and we did a webinar last week for the insurance company with 150,000 insureds, and they specialize in a variety of areas, and one of those being churches. And they saw this list, and we've had several churches who come up and identified individuals within their congregation that have these types of exposures. These are the types of things that you would look for and think about, that risk factors are going up associated with it. Let's break this down a little bit further. So we think about red flags, behaviors of concern. Any comment regarding suicide, it's never a joke. It's going to be something to be taken seriously. And what we have found in the school marketplace, if you have a student that says that they're contemplating suicide, there's virtually 100% correlation that they have a kill list in there of this is who we're going to get even with. And so they're going to take those individuals out and then commit suicide. Imagine what you would do in your school to have to go to a parent and say, your child is on this other child's kill list. This is a significant problem and a high correlation factor in our schools. Intimidating comments, talking about hurting someone or making them pay, clearer behaviors of concern. Warning signs, fits of rage, the inability to process and operate at a reasonable level in that escalation. And finally, we dealt with a school where their student got so angry, the fits of rage, that their fists through the sheetrock, that those elements are really clear. It doesn't take a great deal of insight to be able to identify. Let's talk about some of the red flags that aren't quite as clear. One is the fascination of weapons. Now, that's not an automatic behavior of concern. We've got hunting and the role of those things will be placed, but if there's a fascination with past criminals or violence or particular types of weapons, by the way, on the anniversary of Columbine or Virginia Tech, we always see copycats coming into play and moving forward. Depression. Depression is an early warning sign of self-esteem that could put us on a path going towards suicide. We see depression leading to cutting, and you can probably put a face on students that you've seen or teachers that you've seen that have those types. Excuse me, I've got a sneeze there. I promise I'm not contagious on this call. That could well be a beginning concern. Any substance abuse, those are warning signs, and we want to try to detect that as early as we can. And then suspected abuse in the home. Domestic violence has come to school. It comes with our students. It comes with our teachers. Those are the areas that we want to start to think about as a behavior of concern. And then finally, any change in behavior. Someone used to be active in the band and they dropped out, or their choir, or they were on the sports team and they're no longer there. You walk into the lunchroom and they're not sitting with other students, they're sitting beside themselves. They used to get A's and now they're struggling to get C's. So any of these changes also become an early indication. Now, I want to go back and touch those protective factors again, and when you think about them, it's the loner that we're concerned about, interest at church and outside of school, someone that has positive coping skills, someone who takes responsibility. These are all things that can mitigate those behaviors of concern so that our action level is probably lower. Well, that's great, Jim. We see that there are threats. We got that. We understand that there are behaviors of concern that we need to understand, that will tell us Well, what do we do with all of that? How do we put it in a program to reduce the probability that we have a violent act that's going to occur within our school? Well, we put that together in a behavioral risk threat assessment program. And it's got 4 major components that you see listed on the screen. And my thought is that most of you are doing portions of these, probably not all, and probably don't have them interrelated. The awareness training goes back to the areas that we've been talking about. Training students, training parents, training teachers to be aware of what's going on so that they can intercede and react to those individual areas. That opportunity is the fundamental foundation of everything we're talking about. Because how many times after a violent event have you heard someone come forward and going, well, you know, I knew something was wrong, or, you know, it doesn't surprise me. Well, we have to know what to be aware of. Now that leads us into creating an intelligence program so that we can understand how that information is out there and become informed. You need an anonymous reporting plan within your school. There are services that will do this. Fortunately, they're not very expensive. And it needs to move beyond an email or doing something on a website or even making a phone call and reporting it in. In today's world, when we're dealing with young people, it needs to have anonymous texting, the ability to send a text anonymously and to report something to get that information in. If you go out to dinner, you'll see our young people sitting across from each other. Instead of saying pass the salt, they're sending a text message across the table to make that happen. Social media monitoring is an important element here. We're going to talk about that one other time in our conversation today. And as we specialize in that, that's an important area to look at. Now, fortunately, there's some statistics that work to our advantage. 80% of the time, if someone has ill intent, somebody else knows. 67% of the time, 2 or more people know, and when people know, they talk. And where do they talk? They talk on social media. So that's an opportunity to become aware of those things are going on. We're not talking about breaking into somebody's passcode protected account, but if there's information out there, you should know it, and your school needs to be aware of it. And I'll give you some examples in a few minutes to talk more about it. You need, obviously, doing pre-screening. You're doing background checks on teachers and volunteers, and our schools are doing a good job of that. Now, the standards and best practices are our annual background checks for parents that are having interactions, volunteers, and teachers. And the background checks need to be more than looking at the National Felony Database. It has to be looking at the county level at misdemeanors. Would you want to know that that person that's going to drive on the field trip had a DUI? Would you want to know that there were domestic violence issues in a home? And so that's where doing the background checks at the county courthouse level gives you that differential. And the firms that you're in all likelihood using today have that capability. It's not a large expense. Strongly encourage you to know that. Because if there is a problem, it's going to come out that you were not aware and could have known. The other are key metrics, and you can establish those, and we'll talk about them. They, like attendance, some student that has been attending well and starts to have a problem, someone who was making good grades and now isn't, someone that is not as involved in the activities of the school as they were. Those can all be indicators as part of your intelligence network that something's going on and happening. So we can have awareness training, we can have an intelligence network, but we've got to keep that information in the central repository and share it. If a teacher sees something and a coach sees something and a student reports something, who takes that information and puts it together to see, wait a minute, something's occurring here? And so that's where the central repository takes place. This could be as simple as having the notes and information in a file cabinet that's organized in a manner. It can be done in an online basis also. And it would work with your behavioral management team. Sometimes that's called a threat management team within your school. We'll talk more about that with the BeRThA program in just a minute. But when you think about this, we want the decisions made in a structured manner So you review the information and you do the same thing the same way every time. That's an important element to keep in mind within this program of both categorizing the behavior and then doing a risk analysis or risk screening on, are we on a path to violence. The behavioral management teams in schools are generally made up of 3 people, one representing the counseling or HR function, one representing the safety, security, or facilities at the location, and the last representing the academics. We want 3 people involved in making those decisions, not one. So the BeRThA program is made up of components. And the acronym, again, Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment, is BeRThA, B-E-R-T-H-A. And there first has to be a way to take in the tip or the insight that's going on. It then has to go through an initial risk categorization, and we recommend that there be an administrator on duty who is fielding that call or getting it to render that opinion. And we'll step you through what that looks like in just a few minutes. If this one is, if there is an indication that we need to do a more formal investigation, that would go to your behavioral management team that I just described, and they would take action and then have a monitoring plan and do a sign-off. So the program's very straightforward with these 4 components, and it becomes integrated into the programs that you're currently doing with your school. I want to go back one last time and make sure we hit the behaviors of concern and give you a slightly different way to organize your thoughts there. Think of the person that we're concerned about in the center. Then you've got the puzzle parts going around it, and on the outer ring, the protective factors here. This leads to a behavioral snapshot, and that's what it is. It's a picture today of what we see. We look at this over time, like today and tomorrow and next week and next month, because we think of it more as a video. What's happening? Is the behavior escalating toward violence? Is it remaining the same? Is it de-escalating within it? Let's go inside each of those puzzle parts and look at them. I'll break the school down into thinking about social and peer interaction. And you see the descriptors here to look for. You probably have thought of some students that might have demonstrated some of those other elements. Another behavioral concern area is what's going on in the family. Change in the family is a significant risk factor at school. Multiple losses, the death of a parent, the death of a sibling, financial crisis, divorce in the home, all of those elements can be impacting. The physiological ones, and you see the descriptors here, mood disorder. Look at the last 2. Someone that's over-controlled anger, someone that's under-controlled anger. Looking at those elements, those could again be risk factors that are starting to build associated. We don't want to lose sight of those things that are urgent, brandishing a weapon, stalking, suicide references. We're calling 911, we're getting security or the police involved. We're going to get and deal with those things immediately. And then the last would be the behaviors, what we've been listing in a variety of ways, putting them in those areas. You start to see them building into the process that we're concerned about here. So I don't want you to forget the protective factors that we talked about. That's that outer ring. Family, friends, community involvement, taking responsibility, interests outside of school. All of those things can mitigate or temper the types of behavior that we've just been talking about. Okay, Jim, I get it. They're behaviors of concern. If we can figure those things out, we've got a chance. How do we structure this, and how do we make it work in our school? All right, here's a different way to look at the program, and it's a violence prevention program very clearly. And when we talk about BeRThA, that's what it is. So below you see the framework and the plan. To the left of your screen where it says awareness, that's everything we've been talking about. We want our students, our parents, our teachers, our staff to be aware of all the behaviors of concern that we're talking about. You have to have an intelligence network to get that information in, to get the tips coming in, the anonymous reporting, monitoring what's going on here to create those actions, having the ability of doing the background checks, the key metrics that we talked about, performance, absenteeism, etc. So how does it fit into the plan? The tip comes in. There has to be an intake. We recommend that comes in via the administrator on duty. They then do the initial risk categorization. The BeRThA program lays out, here's the way that you would rate that and rank it to give you that direction. The repository, so we don't lose it. The behavioral management team or the threat management team that would do an investigation if we think it's of a greater concern and we need to do a clear risk screening at this point, then developing the action plan or the case management plan for that student, the ongoing monitoring, and then finally sign off and record keeping. We need to do the same thing the same way every time, or we're putting a risk factor into our school and into the exposure of our children. Down in the green box, there are other things that you need to have in your school: emergency plans, security plans, doing those types of assessments. They're not going away because you have this, but we're trying to get before the violence area arrives. Let's start at the beginning. There's been some information that comes in, a tip, teacher sees something, you get a report of a particular area. It comes to that administrator on duty. They may interview where the source came from. They go through an initial risk categorization. There's a form that spells out how you accomplish it, and then they determine the action that's required. And we're going to determine an action as one of three things. First action is routine. It's a normal, we've seen it before, it's a discipline problem. We're going to deal with that as we have always dealt with that in our school. We don't want to interfere and make a change, but you would document that, monitor it, and it would go into central repository. Because if we had something this week and something next week and something the week after related to that person, you'd want to come back and see what's the pattern associated with it. We're going to jump all the way over to urgent, that red box with the action. Here's the person that's coming in with the gun. Here's the specific threat that's here. We're going to remove that person from the school. We're calling 911. We're getting involved with our security. We're dealing with that issue. It becomes extremely critical for us. And again, it goes into our central repository. The middle one is the one that schools are having difficulty with. It's not really routine, and it's not an urgent action that we need to take for violence. We need to do an investigation. So you would escalate it to your threat management team or your behavioral management team, and you go through the behavioral risk screening process that would then lead you to what action do you need to take. Let's take that middle section where it says investigate and break that down further to show you how the behavioral management team goes through that. They then would gather the information, they do the interviews, they go again, if it's a suicide related, to do the screening as needed there, and they'd analyze the findings from all of this information, and then they go through the risk screening process. Here are the questions, here's how you interpret them, and giving you those answers. Now, if you did that, and the three individuals on your team said, you know, it's guarded. We need to kind of just continue to monitor, work with the student, and see what's being done. It's a little more than normal discipline, but yet it's not imminent. It's not something that we think is about to occur. You'll continue and operate under that manner to follow. We're going to jump all the way to the right to that black box that says imminent risk. This is a student who we think that it's going to suddenly happen. We missed it on the first categorization, but now as we're getting in here, this is going to be a violence event. We're going to immediately get the authorities involved, get the student out of the school, and deal with that at that point in time. Just below that is the box to the left where it says severe. When you're looking in that severe area, what we're dealing with here is it's not happening right now, but we can clearly see that's going to where this is leading. At that point in time, we're going to suspend the student, send them home, request that they meet with a psychiatrist or a forensic psychologist, and before they can re-enter in school, we want a report from that professional who says that they are no longer a risk to themselves or others. And when they come back to school, we'll have a re-entry plan, and then we'll have a plan of monitoring and working with them through the process. Now, the elevated that falls between guarded and severe, this is something that's more. It's not yet to being severe, but we think that if we don't intervene, something significant could happen. At this point in time, we've gone through the risk screening. All the indicators tell us this is where we are. We're going to have a detailed program of how we work with this person, this student, and how we monitor. And we're going to follow up on that on a regular basis. And our behavioral management team, as they meet every few weeks or monthly, they'll be reviewing the progress that's been associated with it. Again, all of this information goes into the central repository, so you're under control with it. When you think about it, there are 4 components that we've just listed: awareness, reporting, the central repository, and the plans. And under the plans, we've got investigation, screening, the action plan or case management, the monitoring, the sign-off, and the record keeping. Now you're in control. Now you can see what's going on and accurately intervene before we're dealing with a violent act. Now, there's a lot of questions that come back. Can you really predict a crisis? And the answer is overwhelmingly yes. When we see these types of events, and many times there were warning signs that were missed. And by missing those warning signs, then you saw the escalation to violence continuing to occur. And how many times have you seen the report, well, you know, there was something just not right there. There was a problem. I always suspected it. Those are the comments that we're hearing. And if you have gone through this process and you have a structured environment, you can have a significantly different outcome. If you'd learned about those indicators and were trained, then you would intervene before the crisis could even have been considered, much less occurring. Let's break this down a little bit more when we talk about predictive intelligence. And by the way, the term of art here is open source intelligence, because it's the anonymous reports that would come in. It's the reports from the teachers, the tips that would be coming through that you would see and aware. It's the review of social media, of what's being said on social media. All of that is combined together to create an open source intelligence network to let you know. We're very fortunate today. There's been so many changes in the last years that you can actually monitor social media very inexpensively to determine what's being said and done. Social media is not random, it's targeted. They're talking about a specific person, and so we want to identify who's the target of that, and then that will help us in our decision making and where we intervene and what we need to know. Now, in this area, people know, and when they know, what do? They talk, and they talk on social media. The 2 statistics that I gave you earlier, 80% of the time someone knows if there's an ill intent besides the person who's thinking about carrying it out, and 67% 2 or more people know. And today we're in a world where words matter and intent matters. The little saying that you've heard, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me, is simply not true. Words harm. Words have impact. And we see students driven under a cyberbullying or even a direct bullying format that leads to a violent reaction. So the conversation is a very complex one. And by the way, this is something great for all those English majors in college and looking at the semantics of speech, the syntax, the context, the idiom, of looking at what's really going on in this particular area. Now, it's important that we listen to these conversations, and we have to listen to where they are. We have to do it in a structured, investigative manner so that we can identify trends that are starting to happen. We see that impact because we're looking for those factors. That feeds back into the intelligence that you have to make those decisions, and it's important that we're making those decisions now, not tomorrow when the gun comes to school, but now. That will make a difference. Karen Mazzullo, who's our Chief Intelligence Officer, saw a picture. It was a picture of a classroom with a student with a gun in his hand. And it disturbed Karen greatly. So she did the research, and she was able to figure out that it was a math class and the teacher's name, and it was a school in South Carolina. Karen picked up the phone, called the school, and said, I'm going to send you this picture to the principal.
Don't know if it's a real gun or a fake. I don't know if it's an old picture or a new, but it concerned me and I wanted you to know. The principal goes to the classroom, talks to the student, and he does have a gun in the classroom. And it was handled peacefully, and the situation was dealt with quickly and efficiently without harm to anyone. He called her back, the principal did, and said, the thing that disturbed me was that we had 30 students that saw this happening, none of which came forward. We had 30 students who were posting on social media about it, and none came forward. If you don't have that intelligence network, you're going to have a problem and a gap. So when we do that, we use it in combination with the risk and the threats and the vulnerabilities, the behaviors of concern, and that creates a predictive, actionable intelligence network for you to make a difference. So as we think about it, we use the terms like listen and look, and doing it before now. Listening, we're looking at streams and phrases and words. Think of it as a tripwire. And if we start to see something saying that, then we want to stop and look at that. We look at a location. We look at a person. We look at an event. We also have the ability to look at not only what were they saying or doing today, but what were they doing Thursday of last week or the week before, because it's that trend line. It's that set of activities that are moving forward. So what are the recommendations? First of all, you need a plan. You've got emergency plans. That's great. You need to have a plan focused on behaviors of concern within your school. You need to have a plan associated with having anonymous reporting, having a threat assessment program that can deal with these behaviors of concern, awareness training for students, parents, teachers, and staff, and getting involvement from everyone that's involved. You need to identify support resources either virtually or locally, access to a psychiatrist or a forensic psychologist that can give you help or assistance. If you need help on a threat of violence assessment, we can consult with you virtually when having a forensic psychologist to help you interpret the information that you're looking at. I want to point out also now there are new insurance products that are available for an active shooter, a deadly weapon, or sexual molestation. You may well find that there's a gap in your insurance coverage, and not only in the insurance you get, but there's services that come with that in risk management and support. Having the open source intelligence network and monitoring it is a key element to make sure that all of these things work together, and then training and testing. If you don't train, if you don't test, your plan won't work. So as we break through that, we divide this into 3 areas. Predict. I recommend that you update your risk and threat assessment. That's a physical security assessment of your school. It should be done at least once every 3 years to make sure that you're looking at access and lighting and entry requirements and notification and the ability to communicate. Under plan, make sure your plan aligns with best practices. Remember, you're talking about how do we make decisions in a crisis when the information we have is wrong or limited. Develop a behavioral risk threat assessment program at your school. The good news is because you're a RenWeb school, you have access to that through Firestorm for a license at no cost to your school for the first year. My recommendation is you start that now, go through the process, work through the spring session so that it's fully in place when it's back to school in the fall. Now is the time to get the training, get the program, get your team in place to be ready. Also a crisis communications plan with message maps of what are you going to say and what are you going to communicate. If you find yourself in a crisis, call Firestorm. You can call us 24/7. That's one of the benefits, again, of your use of RenWeb. And we have a program called Crisis Stop. We'll get him on the phone with you in that first critical hour of a crisis, because the decisions that you make, the actions that you take, and the words that you say will determine is this crisis going to stabilize or escalate. And for that call, there is no charge for your school. And the letters STOP stand for stabilize the situation, T, trigger the resources that you need, O is for the opine of what the consequences are, both short and long term, and P is to prevent you from making the common mistakes that we see happen over and over. Again, I would encourage you to have an analysis done of your insurance and your current response plans. I'd ask your insurance broker to review and identify any gaps that you have. And then finally, stress test your plan. We did a virtual exercise last week that around the social media world, particularly with live streaming of video, dealing with the exposures that could come from that, from cyberbullying, sexting, all of those areas. Firestorm and RenWeb provide that type of an exercise, or natural disasters or active shooter. You can put your crisis or safety team around the table and experience what it's like going through making those types of decisions. So what can you do? You can download the brief. It should be up on the website shortly. If you go to the Firestorm website, firestorm.com/briefs, you'll see underneath that recorded webinars and brief, and you can go back to the webinars that were done last year or the year before or the year before, and it's a virtual online training center for your school and your team, combined with the papers and briefs that are there. It will make a difference in terms of those outcomes. Our thanks go out to RenWeb and FACS for underwriting this webinar series to bring this information to you and support, and the RenWeb software has safety tools built into it. If you've got questions, you can go to firestorm.com to look at the material we talked to. You can send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com, or you can pick up the phone and call us at 800-321-2219. I want to take a minute to thank you for everything that you do every day. This is a mission and a calling to help create the educational environment for our young people, to provide them with your leadership and direction that needs to be in place so that they can grow morally, spiritually, academically, and even athletically in that area. But every day there's a school where there's behaviors of concern happening. And unfortunately, the majority of time, those behaviors can be missed. If those behaviors are missed and that escalates to violence, that's a violent act that never had to occur. None of us can unring a bell. Once we ring that bell, the sound is there and we can hear it. But we see that it's about to happen. The bell won't have to ring. And that's a major difference here. You can make a difference in your school, and you can make a difference in your school now, and you can put in a program dealing with behaviors of concern, behavioral risk threat assessment, and you can do it at no cost to your school today. So we're going to try to reach out to everyone on the call. We didn't have time today to take the questions that had come in during the call and give you those answers. If you have questions, reach out to us. We'll reach back to you. Thank you again for all that you do, and until our webinar next month, have a great day and a good weekend coming up. Talk to you later. Goodbye.